Hello friends and welcome back to my 2016 Game of the Year Awards Bangarang. Each day I'll be celebrating a variety of my favourite things in video games from the past 12 months. It's day 5, which means the individual awards are over and it's time for one final rundown of my top 10 games from last year. Of course, these are all just my own personal opinions, but if you'd like to share your picks in the comments, I would love to hear them. It's time for the big one. Game of the Year 2016. This is it. 2016 was a year filled with fantastic video games. I didn't even get to everything I was hoping to, and yet I still found myself overloaded with choice when it came time to put this list together. Looking at the full thing, I ended up with at least 11 games that wouldn't have felt out of place at number 1, and my final top 5 in particular was so incredibly close that choosing between them for the top slot was as tough as novelty list features gets. But choose I did, so here are my 10 favourite video games of 2016, from bottom to top. Let's go! Number 10, Clash Royale. It was only a matter of time before a mobile game made one of my yearly top 10s because some really fantastic titles have been coming out on the platform in recent years. Yet I'm still stunned that the game which made it first was a Supercell joint. Clash of Clans and Boom Beach were fun but ultimately unspectacular. Clash Royale is perhaps one of my favourite real-time strategy games ever, and that isn't a sentence I say lightly. The deck building idea is a smart design choice, allowing players to create a team which feels unique and allowing you to make interesting design choices in how you play. You can attempt to put together a well-rounded deck which takes on all comers, or you could try to directly counter the cards you're running into the most. To its credit, it rarely feels as though a single setup is the one. Even across the top level of play there are usually a pretty interesting diversity of builds, and the balanced team aren't afraid to give cards a nudge in power when they feel it's necessary. Making just a small tweak to your cards feel significant, a decision you can make based on observed weaknesses in your deck over time. Even the levelling aspect never caused me issues, because the matchmaking does a great job of keeping you around that 50% win rate as you'd expect from a well-designed system. And in the tournament mode, all cards and towers are capped to the same level anyway. It's apparent that a lot of care and attention from good minds went into Clash Royale, and it paid off. Number 9. Uncharted 4: A Thief's End. The story arc for the original Uncharted trilogy wrapped up pretty tightly, so finding yet another way to draw Nathan and friends back in for one final adventure all over again was pretty tough. Naughty Dog managed to do a good job, however, telling a tale which not only recontextualises some of the series' past events, but also isn't afraid to paint its protagonist as a strikingly imperfect figure. It says a lot that in a game centred around what a flawed figure his brother is, that Nate actually comes off as even more thoughtless at times. The story has some really fantastic moments, although it ultimately falls a little flat at the end, with no one getting much in the way of comeuppance and very few lessons actually learned. Thankfully, the ride that Uncharted 4 takes you on is more than enough of a draw. The locations you travel to are vast, gorgeous and far more diverse in structure than a lot of the past entries. The more open-ended environments not only feel more natural, but they allow the game to step away from its boilerplate cover-based shooting in favour of more measured, stealthy encounters. I played almost the entire campaign without ever really engaging in direct combat, instead sneaking carefully about and making quick escapes whenever I was in a tight spot, and it was all the better for it. Those trademark set pieces are certainly still there, however, and while they can occasionally feel a tad clunky, when they do actually come together, they're still some of the most breathtaking sequences around. Number 8. Titanfall 2. Titanfall 2's campaign isn't just about a super soldier, it's about one man and his robot buddy, forced together by circumstance only to find what a perfect team they make. It throws new ideas at you as if they were running out of fashion, and it manages to strike a wonderful balance between making you feel like the hero pilot one moment and a single cog in this beautifully whirring machine in the next. Coming to the series having spent only a short time with its predecessor, I felt much like I imagined protagonist Jack Cooper does at the game's outset, competent with the basics of running around, navigating the environment and shooting dudes, but rather clumsy when it came to putting all that together. It doesn't take long before things start to come together though, and just as I had a decent handle on quickly and stylishly cleaning out a room full of enemies, Titanfall 2 unzipped its bag of novelty goodies and started tossing them into my hands one after another. Just about every level has its own feel or some unique twist to it, from the construction complex of Into the Abyss with its sliding, shifting mechanisms that see you riding on buildings as they are spun and constructed around you, to the time-shifting action puzzle of Effect and Cause, which sees you jumping back and forth between time periods and attempting to manage enemies and hazards in both time zones simultaneously. It shouldn't come as too great a surprise that the minds behind Modern Warfare are still capable of pushing the first-person shooter genre forward, but just how well-paced and packed with interesting ideas and fun encounters Titanfall 2's campaign is still bears worth mentioning. The Respawn team nailed it on the multiplayer end as well. I wasn't expecting to spend much time with it given my feelings on the first game, but the redesigned Titans just clicked with me. No longer do they feel like big hulking slabs just pounding volleys back and forth. Instead, Titan combat feels as nuanced and tactical as the on-foot action. That said, the on-foot action might still be the real star here, because bouncing from walls to windows and flanking enemies mid-engagement is still incredibly satisfying. But you pulled it off, Respawn, and it makes me happy to say it. I love those big old robots. Number 7. The Witness. I've long been a sucker for puzzle games, so having a beautiful island full of brain teasers to mull over with my mid-morning coffee was always an appealing aspect to me. I, like most, was initially skeptical about how one core puzzle mechanic could be stretched out over the course of a game with a potential hour count in the dozens, but I was eager to find out what tricks old Johnny Blow had up his sleeve. As it transpired, those tricks turned out to be a whole wealth of different layers to build up over the basic gridline framework. Dots you have to cover, shapes you have to outline, colours you have to match, and so on. That's all well and good, but it doesn't take long for the puzzles in The Witness to spread free of the confines of their panels and really begin to stretch their legs, and your brain. Soon you're studying the position of apples on nearby trees to uncover pathways, lining up panes of glass in just the right way to filter the light and reveal a solution, and mentally, or in some cases physically, snapshotting shadows and then visualising their positions in another location to give you your next solution. One of my favourite parts of The Witness, however, is its complete lack of reliance on instructions. Past the initial control scheme, the game never explicitly tells you anything. It shows you and allows you to figure things out for yourself. Every new mechanic you encounter always has a few simple starters to get you going before progressing onto a couple more that hone in on the key to unlocking this new system. It's a masterclass in natural tutorialization, offering up the tools for you to learn in a manner which makes you feel like the smartest kid around. The reliance on that consistent underlying framework is validated as well, because it allows the Witness to sprinkle multiple mechanics onto choice puzzles, tasking you to bring your knowledge learned across several areas into solving tougher challenges. Oftentimes you'll come across a one-off instance of a mechanic that you might not stumble on in full for several hours, and it'll completely baffle you, but there's a real joy to returning down the line with the benefit of time and instantly seeing a solution which had eluded you completely for so long. As if all this wasn't enough, The Witness has one final card to play, in the form of its environmental puzzles. These not only make for a unique point of revelation for each player who discovers them, but they suddenly change the way you look at the entire world, as it becomes the biggest puzzle panel of them all. I'm not even sure I'm just talking about in-game anymore. That's how I see the real world now. It's all grids and lines, and it's wonderful. I love it. Number 6. Ratchet and Clank. I still have very distinct memories of getting the first Ratchet & Clank game for Christmas and instantly falling in love with its gorgeous looks, charming humour and over-the-top action. Ever since, the franchise has remained near and dear to my heart, delighting me throughout the generations. I was eager to see how Insomniac would handle a reimagining of the first game, especially having recently gone back to the original collection and noting how simple and tightly enclosed a lot of that game felt compared to latter entries in the series. 2016's Ratchet & Clank floods my happiness centres with sheer delight. It recreates just enough of the structure of the classic levels to spark off those nostalgia zones, whilst also not being afraid to chop and change, or to apply new concepts that the developers have introduced over the years. In particular, I was glad to see several ideas coming across from the last entry in the series, 2013's Into the Nexus, which was a bite-sized taste of the creativity and innovation which clearly still flows through the Insomniac team, and it left me hungry to see those concepts realised on a grander scale. In particular, the free-flying jetpack sequences really add a fun twist on areas, allowing you to take to the skies and soar around environments on a wholly different scale. Despite seeming like another dimension of movement could be one thing too many to keep track of, it all comes together thanks to the fluid, tight controls. The story was engaging enough to carry me through. It's a little clumsier than some of the series' best offerings, but Ratchet & Clank remains chock full of endearing characters and some of the best humour in current games writing. The real treat, of course, is in that big, juicy arsenal of weapons, and to its credit, the game strikes a fantastic balance on the armoury front. It might not be the most expansive range of tools Ratchet has ever had his hands on, but there's more than enough variety to keep things interesting, and crucially, each individual weapon feels like it serves a unique purpose, meaning there's reason to use everything in your kit and not simply rely on just one thing. Unless that one thing happens to be the Rhino, of course. Ratchet & Clank remains an incredibly important series to me personally, so it was wonderful to see its origins reimagined in such a compelling fashion, and I can only hope that there's still plenty more in store for that roguish Lombax and his cheeky robot friend.
Thanks, Lars.
Number 5. Doom. How differently this could all have gone. It's easy to envision a world in which the 4th Doom game comes out and is disappointing, or perhaps even worse, forgettably mediocre. It's also possible to imagine a scenario where it's decent or even good, but fails to capture the feel of classic Doom and just ends up feeling like another solid first-person shooter in a sea of COD-likes. In fact, it seems as though that came close to happening. Thankfully though, the team at id made the bold decision to take things back to the drawing board, because what they created instead was a sublime, slick, modern take on everything that made Doom great. Practically everything about Doom 2016 feels right. The visuals are gorgeous and grotesque, with monsters instantly recognisable as their old school counterparts, yet updated into beautifully hideous and intimidating modern forms, and the whole thing runs at a buttery smooth 60 frames a second. Weapons are powerful and loud, booming, crackling and fizzing over the incredible soundtrack, and having a real sense of impact as you blast your way through the enemy hordes. The glory kills add a fresh new twist to the combat, encouraging you to play in a more aggressive manner than in past games, getting up close and personal with the demons. Other additions are welcome too, such as regenerating grenades or the perks and upgrades system, which lets you tune each weapon in slightly different ways to better suit your playstyle or the current situation. Yet Doom very adamantly reinforces its throwback nature. The decision to remove reloading keeps combat moving at a fast pace, while major encounters are specifically broken up into fixed arenas where enemies spawn in. And there's no pretense of being realistic necessary. This is an arcadey game at heart, and by embracing that, id were able to take full advantage of the silliness and make something truly special. That core look, feel and sound is the beating heart that makes Doom so much fun, but there are so many little additional touches which help to elevate it. The pacing is fantastic, with frantic combat sequences interspersed with quieter moments of downtime as you explore and hunt out secrets. Those hidden goodies were so compelling, and the way they were scattered about so smartly done, that I felt compelled to scour every possible nook and cranny for collectibles and upgrades, almost to the game's detriment in fact, as I spent so long searching in the early levels that I needed a break upon reaching the mission end screen. That sensation was overcome quickly, however. By the time you're first pulled into hell, the intensity of the battles had ramped up, and I was so hooked on the combat and eager to see what lay in store next that I couldn't put it down until I was done, at which point I immediately revisited every level in search of the very few pickups I'd passed by on my first run through. Since then, Doom has added an arcade mode, giving an even better way to go back and blast through levels for funsies, and I've been doing exactly that. I can think of no greater testament to the success of this year's reboot than the fact I removed my Brutal Doom shortcut from my desktop. I simply didn't need it anymore, because the best version of Doom is right here. Number 4. Dark Souls 3. From Software really gave themselves a lot to live up to with Dark Souls 3. It's the third game in a trilogy, the fourth to bear the Souls name, and the fifth such game from that development team. Not only did it have to follow on directly after Bloodborne, which was both my personal favourite and took the established formula in a new and exciting direction, but FromSoft decided to also directly make ties back to the first Dark Souls, the game probably most widely considered to be the pinnacle of the series. Dark Souls 3 doesn't quite get there in all the ways you'd want, but given the immense weight it was carrying on its shoulders, it came astonishingly close. From a gameplay standpoint, Dark Souls 3 serves as the culmination of all FromSoft's efforts to date, and it shows. It stands shoulder to shoulder with Bloodborne as absolutely the best playing game in the series. The weapons on offer are diverse and sport a staggering variety of different movesets. The armour options give players more dress-up potential than the Milan Fashion Week, and whilst the magic can sometimes feel like too much investment for not quite enough potency, it still boasts a phenomenal number of unique spells to play with. The areas you visit are big and involved, which can at times take away some of the tight-knit personality that was so striking about earlier games in the series, but the openness of many of the environments is quite something. There's a real sense of wonder at the sheer scale on offer in many of the environments as well, something past games hinted at but don't achieve quite so well as this one manages. Dark Souls 3's core progression takes a slightly more linear path than most entries in terms of moving from area to area, but in its place, each individual area feels like an interwoven network of pathways or open spaces. As for the foes which inhabit those areas, they've come a long way as well. The enemy AI is some of the best around, with almost every encounter feeling meaningful and challenging, especially with some of the heftier knights and more unusual creatures. Of course, it wouldn't be a Souls game without boss fights. Dark Souls 3 starts off with a belter, but then a few of the early boss fights feel a little underwhelming at times. However, I suspect that's in part due to my extreme familiarity with the series. At some point you become accustomed to the size and spectacle of the monsters Miyazaki's team will throw your way. That aside, however, around the halfway mark, Dark Souls 3's boss designers picked up the ball and ran with it. In fact, they ran clean out of the building and booted it into space. The back half of the game is packed with a quite astounding array of some of the very best boss encounters I've ever experienced. I really can't speak highly enough to just how much fun I had learning movesets and finding openings in each opponent's repertoires in the back half. The story is strong too, telling its own narrative but drawing heavy influence from the series' past to do so. Digging back more explicitly into past games was always going to be a risk, and it certainly didn't play to everyone, but I was impressed with how that stuff was handled. From the way you stumble upon the ruins of Anor Londo and the slow build leading up to that inevitable moment, to the reveal of Lord Gwyn's oft-speculated firstborn. Not only did that stuff hit for me tonally, but it was also able to back it up with the gameplay. To their credit, Miyazaki and co do show some measure of restraint, being careful not to directly close too many open threads, and for every question they answer, another is posed in its place. In many ways, Dark Souls 3 feels like a greatest hits collection, a place where players can use just about any build they can think of from the series and engage in jolly cooperation, honourable duels, scandalous invasions and large-scale brawls for years to come. In that respect, it really works as intended. Just about every mechanic from parrying to Estus flasks to the hub system feels like the best implementation of that given system in the series. But it also works well as a standalone game, and playing through multiple times and earning the Platinum Trophy was a highlight of my year. There were so many ways that Dark Souls 3 could have gone disastrously wrong, and yet From Software pulled it off once again. Number 3. Pokémon Sun and Moon. We're 7 generations deep now, plus multiple remakes, and I'm still in on Pokémon. The series has remained fun for me throughout the years, even when some of the entries haven't stood up quite as well as others. However, one thing has remained pretty consistent over the generations, that core progression of moving from town to town, collecting 8 badges, fighting off rivals and troublesome teams, and beating the Elite Four. Sun and Moon is perhaps the biggest step the series has ever taken away from that recurring setup, and the resulting experience shines as brightly as the Alolan sun for all those changes. The most immediately striking thing about Pokémon Sun and Moon is that this no longer feels like just your story through a region which exists specifically for you to pass through it on your adventures. Instead, this is a living, breathing world full of communities and characters with pre-established relationships and histories that feel fleshed out and interesting. You may be on a journey, but the other island inhabitants also have their own business and interests to tend to. Oftentimes that means you'll bump into them frequently over the course of the story, but it feels more natural and not as though everyone is specifically chasing you down at a given moment just to say their line of dialogue or hand you a key item. That dialogue is well worth hearing though, because it's quite possibly the most well written in the series, and certainly some of the most consistently amusing. There are jokes, puns and innuendos galore, but the writers also aren't afraid to get serious from time to time, with some really well handled takes on difficult subjects such as abusive parenting. Alola is overloaded with distinct personalities who I genuinely enjoyed spending time with, and the game offers you multiple opportunities both in the core progression and in side activities to spend time getting to know each of them. It's perhaps worth giving a special shout out to Hau, who in many ways feels like a representation of Pokémon protagonists of old, cheerfully making his way across the islands, largely oblivious to the action going about him, and primarily focused just on beating the island challenge and getting stronger until other occurrences are pointed out to him. You might even argue that this gen is a reversal of fates, with you filling the traditional rival role. Not only do you use the starter which is strong against Hau, but you also beat him to the punch at every major milestone along the way. Hau stands out because he's such a simple character in a game full of more nuanced designs, but I think that might have been an intentional choice. The actual meat and potatoes battling in Sun and Moon is still pretty much as it's always been, but there are some neat additions such as the Z-type moves, which offer you an incredibly potent option but are restricted to one single use per battle and require your mons to be holding a specific item to make use of them. There are plenty of other smart changes in here too, such as the removal of HMs in favour of the Ride Pager, meaning you no longer have to dedicate move slots or even party spaces to being able to navigate the environment and handle obstacles. It all feels incredibly smart across the board. The balance of Pokemon throughout your journey feels great. There are so many new creatures to pull from at this point, but each area feels like it has a good mix of returning and new faces. I was even able to fill out an entire squad by the time I'd made it to the end of Route 1, and a fairly diverse one at that. There's a well-balanced selection of creatures from across the generations, which leaves you with plenty of options for how you want to construct your team. Perhaps one of the smartest additions of all is the Alolan forms of the first gen monsters, which have been around for so long at this point that seeing them take on brand new looks and type combinations was a wonderful way to breathe some new life into a few old fan favourites. With the success of Pokémon Go earlier in the year, Sun and Moon feels very much like a deliberate move in a new direction for the series, freshening up the formula and tossing in a selection of the most interesting Pokémon from across the years, along with some remixes of classics and a pretty strong new batch of critters. For those who are drawn back by Go after years away, this generation finally helps to shatter the image that Pokémon is always the same game over and over. That certainly isn't limited to those returning, however. As a long-time fan of the series, so much about Sun and Moon feels refreshing and new, and combined with the strongest storytelling and writing the series has ever seen, it all comes together to form a serious contender for my favourite games in the whole franchise. Number 2, Hitman. The Hitman series has always thrived on juxtaposing its serious tone and subject matter against its over-the-top settings and more imaginative methods of elimination, and IO's latest entry is undoubtedly their finest yet. I'm still shocked how well things turned out. It wasn't long before release that many people were prepared to write this year's entry off completely. The past game, Absolution, had been such a disappointment to long-term fans that the developers had explicitly apologised for it. Then, in the run-up to this game's launch, there was a whole debacle where IO shifted to an episodic model and then refunded everyone who had already pre-ordered the game. Alarm bells were ringing, and not in the fun, someone saw me chuck a can of Dr. Pop at a stern army general way either. Not only were they shifting the game's format at the last minute, but episodic games have rarely come together well. It brings me so much joy that IO not only produced their best game in the series yet, but that they completely justify their decision to roll out content over the course of several months with an active live team and consistent updates and events. I've been a fan of the idea of Hitman since the series began, and I have enjoyed playing past entries, but they've always felt like a real struggle against the systems to me. When I pulled off a hit, it felt cool, but the specificity with which you had to follow steps to complete certain tasks was such that I always ended up with constant trial and error reloads or simply resorting to a walkthrough. Hitman 2016 nails the balancing perfectly, from guard placement to the way information spreads between AI characters to the vast swathe of different potential ways to take out each target. This latest iteration allows you to truly feel like a master hitman, whether you're pulling off the perfect assassination or bumbling your way to success through a series of mix-ups and close calls. Hitman presents you with a series of open playgrounds, each its own world of opportunities. There are already so many pre-scripted ways to take out each target that just hunting each of those down kept me entertained for hours, but then you can adapt your own methods or take a more freeform approach to your man-hitting as you become more comfortable with the systems. Having opportunities be tracked allows you for an easy in. You can take it slow on your first time through and let the game show you some cool ideas as you learn the layout of the level and the ways your targets will behave. Then, having explored a few of the possibilities, you can replay the mission and turn the hints off to test your skills further. It also speaks volumes to the game's strength just how frequently I did replay each of the missions. I didn't even start Hitman until the final episode was already out, because I wasn't sure I'd want to keep going back to levels I'd already beaten, and yet despite having a wealth of content at my fingertips, I found myself obsessively taking on the initial tutorial mission over and over again, until I'd finished every challenge and attempted each possible course of action. This was less of a completionist urge to see boxes get ticked, and rather a simple desire to keep trying out new ideas I'd had during each run until I'd completely run out of things I wanted to attempt. On just about every run through, I'd think of something else I could do differently next time, and I'd experiment to see how it would play out. This desire continued across each of the levels. I reached maximum mastery in the initial Paris map before progressing onto any of the other full story levels, for example, just because of how much fun I was having learning every possible route through the mansion and trying to push my luck at every opportunity. Almost every playthrough unlocks some new toys or bonuses too, whether it be a new undercover starting location, some fancy tools to aid you in your dirty work, or even just some snazzy threads, which means even more reasons to jump back in and play around with your fresh set of goodies. As though that still wasn't enough reasons to keep coming back, IO kept piling on additional content throughout the year. Perhaps the biggest draw were the elusive targets, one-off missions which gave you a limited number of real-world days in which to take on a unique hit. You only had one attempt and you couldn't save, adding a palpable sense of tension to proceedings. Mulling over every possible opportunity and carefully tracking my escape route gave a much more measured feel to proceedings, then giving way to this intense moment as you pull the trigger and set your plan into action, hoping nothing goes awry. By their very nature, they created a level of heart-racing pressure to each attempt, and yet they came around consistently enough that even if you weren't able to fit them all in, you could always give a few of them a shot. Additionally, the escalations proved to be far more entertaining than I had initially anticipated. At first glance, they seemed like simple mini-missions created to fill out the menus with content, but in fact they proved to be a fantastic way to really learn the systems, pushing you to test the limits of exactly what you could get away with. You start with a basic task, such as kill this waiter with a knife while dressed as a security guard, and then the game progressively adds rules. Now take out this other target while still in the same outfit, but you can only wear said clothing for 60 seconds in total. Now do it again, but this time all waiters and guards can see through your disguises. The slow ramp up in difficulty gently urges you to be more and more creative, and I found them to be a fantastic way to improve my skill set. I could go on and on about the aesthetic features layered on top of these incredible clockwork worlds, how each environment buzzes with activity, how bonking someone over the head with a fire extinguisher never stops being satisfying, how the way information spreads across the map helps levels feel like living, breathing worlds. Hitman 2016 is the game I've actually always wanted since the series began. IO have finally managed to turn their long-term vision into a joyous reality. I'm still playing it constantly, and I cannot wait to get my hands on the upcoming Season 2. Number 1. Tokyo Mirage Sessions FE. Here we are, the big one. In many ways, Tokyo Mirage Sessions came rather out of the blue for me. I didn't have any real knowledge of it or its fairly lengthy development history until around the time it came out. As soon as I saw it in action, however, I wanted in. I'm a big fan of the underlying JRPG systems that come from the Shin Megami Tensei team at Atlus, and the whole thing gave off this Persona-light vibe, which felt like the perfect way to fill the void in my heart left by the delay of the latest game in that series. In many ways, Persona-light is a fairly apt description for TMS. There is certainly a lot of crossover in terms of core combat systems, the party structure, the way you slowly build bonds with your companions, its relentless sense of style, and that bouncy, uplifting soundtrack. But it also simplifies some of the more complex aspects, with constraints such as time restrictions removed, collecting and merging personas boiled down into a more straightforward weapon system, and social links turned into side missions which can be easily followed whenever they take your fancy. However, pitching Tokyo Mirage Sessions purely as a spin-off like that would be to sell it short, because the developers have really made it stand out as its own thing. TMS is a game which sparkles with charm from moment 1 through to its conclusion. The setup already promises so much. Protagonist Itsuki goes to support his friend Tsubasa as she auditions to become an idol, only to get dragged into a mystical world known as the Idolosphere, and discover that bizarre creatures known as mirages are attempting to steal Performer, the essence and soul of creativity within everyone, from the world's most talented stars. Before long, the pair are working alongside Fortuna Entertainment, an idol company whose performers not only entertain people on stage and screen, but also act as Mirage Masters, each accompanied by a friendly partner freed from captivity in the other realm. The Mirages are where the Fire Emblem side of things comes in, with each of them being represented by familiar characters from that series. It's a nice touch, and although I've never really gotten deep into the Fire Emblem games, having these established characters form a key part of the plot brought an interesting twist to the mystique. All of your real-world party members are new to TMS, however, and they're all a blast to get to know. Your close friend Toma flips the traditional script early on in the proceedings by arriving to save you during a key battle, revealing himself to have already been involved in hunting mirages prior to the events of the game. The rest of your party will fill out most of the stereotypical character roles you'd expect from a JRPG, and yet they're still a treasure to spend time with thanks to the phenomenal writing and localization work. Spending time getting to know every member was amongst my favourite parts of the game, whether it be learning that your boss Maiko is always hungover because she stays out late at events socialising and works hard to get deals and gigs for her performers, reassuring established idol Kiria that it's okay to let her guard down from time to time and embrace her love of cute stuff, or explaining to unflappable perfectionist Yasiro that taking care of yourself and eating good food is just as important as nailing your lines for an upcoming performance. These stories are compelling enough by themselves that simply playing them through was sufficient reward in itself, but each of them also comes with new moves to use in battle. Speaking of which, the battle system is perhaps where TMS shines the brightest. Atlus have built on the core attacks and spells you'd expect to encounter with their Sessions system, where characters can learn to follow up on critical strikes from their teammates. Chaining these together allows you to build up huge combo attacks, especially so in the later game, where even party members who are not part of your active roster can jump in and contribute. This is an especially nice touch because it gets around one of the biggest problems with the limited party size, meaning that no one on your team ever feels like they're left out of the action and not actually doing anything. Further to this are the wealth of additional combat options such as special performances, ad-libs and duo arts, which add even more layers of strategy. Duo arts in particular stand out, giving you brief moments mid-combo to choose which of two options will benefit you more in your current situation, and helping to extend your session chains out to all new lengths. As I mentioned a minute ago, part of the real joy to these is that as well as offering you tactical depth, they're also directly tied into the performances and events which happen during the side stories, so they feel even more directly earned than the standard skills you might pick from a list. It's a great touch and it helps to keep the sense of personality and charm at the forefront of things. Those performances are fantastic to watch as well, each of them coming with gorgeously choreographed cutscenes and often fantastic musical numbers to boot. Additionally, as you progress through the story and your characters release singles, star in television shows and appear in advertisements and promotions, you'll see those things appear around the world and hear people talk about them. It helps to sell the notion of Fortuna Entertainment as this successful idol group, and having to balance the serious save the world side of things with the busy lives of successful entertainers is a ton of fun. On top of all of those compelling combat systems and the funny light-hearted tone of the writing, Tokyo Mirage Sessions absolutely looks and sounds the part. Everything from character designs to menu interfaces is bright and colourful. Even the simplest of dialogue sequences features wonderful expressions that bring moments to life, and the musical numbers and TV shows which punctuate key story moments range from the breathtaking to the preposterous in the best way possible. The songs are fantastic, feeling genuinely as though they could be actual idol performances, and all the incidental music is mood-setting and catchy as well. There's not a single inch of the game which isn't polished to a gorgeous sparkling sheen. I came to Tokyo Mirage Sessions looking for something to scratch that JRPG itch, whilst I waited for some bigger names to arrive down the line. Ultimately, however, it ended up completely capturing my heart. It's undoubtedly up there with Atlus's best work, and if you're looking for a slightly more approachable take on the Shin Megami Tensei or Persona games, or are even just a fan of JRPGs in general, then you should absolutely give TMS a look. It's a joy and a delight, making me frequently laugh out loud and exclaim at just how stylish everything was, and as tough as its competition out there was, there's ultimately little doubt in my mind that it was my favourite game of 2016. And that wraps up the awards for day 5, and with it, the entire show. It's been a blast making this, and I hope you enjoyed it even half as much as I did putting it all together. I wish I could have got it out a tad sooner, but January ended up being a pretty busy month on all fronts. Thank you for joining me, especially if you made it all the way through the whole thing, and be sure to let me know what you thought of the video and if you agreed with my choices, or what you would have picked instead, in the comments section below. Have a fantastic day, and I will catch you on the next one. Cheers!